Hello, hello, it's The Nose. Later in The Nose, we're going to be talking about The Northman, the new Viking epic by Robert Eggers, a young director whom older directors look at with quite a bit of interest and in some cases reverence. And I want you to know right now that I'm speaking into a wooden microphone, exactly the kind of microphone that they used in 950 AD. And our staff has taken pains to recreate it. Gina Matruda has built a medieval microphone, and my headphones are actually built into the head of a dead bear. And everything else in the studio is meticulously recreated from the 10th century in Scandinavia. And today's episode will be costing $800,000 to do, which is considerably more than our per episode budget. So with that is to come. Right now, we're going to begin with We Own the City. This is the return to Baltimore of David Simon and George Pelecanos, two of the minds behind The Wire. They've got some old friends working with them and some new friends working with them. It's a somewhat different look at Baltimore policing. It is very specifically focused on bad cops, on investigations of bad cops, on consent decrees. It starts about 10 years before the death of Freddie Gray, continues on for several years after the death of Freddie Gray and the protests that accompanied it. And I don't know what else to say, except that it is both kind of the stuff that we learned to be fascinated by. Love might be the wrong word about The Wire, but it's also different from The Wire. It stars John Bernthal in particular as Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, but we will be like the baddest of cops, the devil, essentially. But lots of other tremendous performances that we will be discussing. And when I say we, I mean Tanisha Dugan, director, producer, and arts consultant. Sam Hadelman works in music public relations and hosts the Sam Hadelman Show at Radio Free Brooklyn. And Irene Papoulis, who teaches writing at Trinity College. Great panel, and we've already had some spirited discussions about both of these products. But Sam, I'm going to have you get us going because, young guy that you are nonetheless pretty reverent about The Wire. So tell me about We Own This City and how it landed for you.
Oh yeah, it's so weird, like, cause like The Sopranos is carried over, Breaking Bad is carried over, but for some reason, like, nobody my age watches The Wire, and I'm like the old guy screaming at the cloud, telling people you got to watch The Wire. It's the best show ever made. Da 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 da. I feel like I'm talking about Citizen Kane.
You might as well be, but continue.
Personally, I was so excited. I was so excited when I found out that We Own This City was coming together. I trust the makers of The Wire with my life. I love the casting. I think probably the most fun part of the show is just seeing like what The Wire alumni look like now. Like, it's so funny, like seeing like people who like were kids now playing adults, and especially seeing like Marlo Stanfield now being a cop. Like, and you know what? It doesn't feel like they're trying to recreate the magic of The Wire per se. It feels like an entirely different storyline, just in the same setting. I really like how it's more of like a showing rather than telling in regards to talking about bad policing and all the history behind that. I think there's a magnificent cast, really tight-knit story. I don't really love how they bounce back and forth between timelines. It's a little confusing, even though they do it really well with like those filing reports that the lead character does. But overall, I've been really impressed so far.
Yeah, I feel that's way overdone. Just for people who haven't. First of all, just to clarify or to help people understand, Marlo Stanfield would have been one of the more ruthless drug dealers and drug operators in The Wire, played by Jamie Hector. In this series, he plays Sean Suter, one of the cops. He's a homicide cop who's really tried to stay out of the mud field that just spreads out all around him from some of these other cops doing less admirable things. So yeah, well, I mean, I want to just go around the table here. Tanisha, I know you're having very different reactions to this series, but tell us about those reactions.
I am interested in The Wire and We Built This City because they both connect me to actors I know. So, I went to school with Michael Kevin Darnall, who played Omar's boyfriend in the first season of The Wire. And have been working with McKinley Belcher most recently. So for me, it's sort of lovely to sort of watch McKinley's work on this project.
Can I just jump in and can I just jump in and for the benefit of the audience? McKinley Belcher III plays Mamadou G Money Gondo. He is one of the bent cops. He's kind of an interesting and very pivotal figure in this group of cops who ultimately and let me just say one more thing, which is as we toggle around in time, we are sometimes seeing people like Gondo, McKinley Belcher III's character, operating out on the street and basically just boosting drugs and money out of drug operations. But we also see them being interrogated because, in fact, the series does toggle so much. So we see them being sweated, so to speak, in 2017 by federal agents. But we also see them kind of in their prime, so to speak, out on the streets doing bad things that they do. Anyway, I'm sorry for interrupting. I just thought it might help people.
I mean, federal agents mad because they're flagrant, you gotta. So for me, it was nice to watch the work. Yes, and I think we'll get into it later. It'll be good to hear Irene's thoughts. My question is sort of like, do we need this? I'm curious if Simon has other work, other ways of looking at the DMV, But yeah, I think the work of the actors is pretty incredible.
Yeah. So, well, let's go right over to Irene. We're going to swing around the table here. I don't even know if I necessarily know whether you like this series or not.
At first I wasn't so sure. Because I missed The Wire. I missed the sort of real psychological drama of The Wire that I didn't feel enough at first. But I actually ended up going and watching the first one again and thinking about it, because we've only seen 4. There's only 4 out so far. There's going to be more. And I sort of, the more I watch it, the more I like it. And I feel like there is psychological drama too. It's just different. And also it's raising different questions. And for me, the big question that it's raising is justice possible, and I'm just kind of thinking about that I feel like that's what it's wanting me to think about as I'm watching it. And I just think that I love seeing the characters from The Wire also. Like the fat guy that was always eating in The Wire. And now he's in this one. Maybe did he get a little bit slimmer?
He definitely did. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's kind of interesting to see him as well as the Stanfield, because he was just so evil. It seemed so evil, or not evil as much as just completely cold and jaded in the first one. And now he's so much more of a nice guy, which I find fun. So I'm interested in the story about how do you find justice or search for justice, or is there a way to find justice? Is there a way there's a cynicism, it's like such an intense cynicism that I felt bowled over with when I first started watching it. And then as it's going on, I'm thinking, well, is there a way to have anything actually, any real punishment, or isn't there, and so I still don't know where we're going. And I like that.
I should say only 2 more episodes to go. This is a 6 episode series, so far more compact. All 6 episodes directed by Ronaldo Marcus Green, who most recently directed King Richard. Let's hear a little bit from the series. Let me just set the clip up a tiny bit here, though. This is from episode 1. We hear, if there's sort of a McNulty, sort of a beating heart of this series, it's Nicole Steele. She is a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer from the Justice Department, played by Wumi Mosako, and she is operating out of an office. I thought there's so many little telling details in a series like this. One of the things you see in that first episode is that they've been brought in to explore a consent decree, both pre and post Freddie Gray, to run the police department. They're operating out of a quote unquote office where there's just a piece of printer paper on which someone has printed the words, U.S. Civil Rights Division or something, and scotch taped it up to a door. That's where they're working for years, but with that sense of temporariness. So here's Wumi Mosaku as Nicole Steele, Ian Duff as Ahmed Jackson, who's a brand new, very young DOJ lawyer assigned to her task force.
After Freddie Gray, the mayor went all in, asked DOJ for a full-bore investigation to support a consent decree. But the truth is, she didn't have to ask. After Freddie Gray, we were coming whether she asked or not.
Excess brutality, profiling, selective prosecution.
In a city of 620,000, BPD cops reported over 300,000 pedestrian stops in the last 5 years. Right. And of those stops, less than 4% resulted in a citation or an arrest. We have 7 black males who were each stopped more than 30 times.
Driving while black, walking while black. Same damn bullshit.
You seem angry.
Are you?
Sure. But I don't make it my everything.
So, one of the differences, Sam, between this and The Wire, this is based on real life incidents. Some of these characters actually exist; they are real figures. That was, I think, not really ever the case in The Wire. At the beginning of this series, when they're talking about the mayor, they say Marty O'Malley, and they say he wants to run for governor. That's why we have to do all of this kind of stupid and largely cosmetic policing, which involves pulling people off corners for loitering in a drug-free zone or failure to obey, knowing they're going to be cut loose in less than 24 hours. They're just trying to juke their stats, to use the Wire's phrase, and kind of improve their overall profile. Now, one thing that I didn't know that I depend on you for, Sam, is to know that, for example, there is a rapper who is complaining in one of his raps about a dirty cop. The dirty cop is named Herschel, played by an unusually doughy and malevolent-looking version of the actor Josh Charles. I didn't realize that Young Moose was a real person, Sam. Tell us more about that.
Oh, I absolutely adore Young Moose's music. I really love the DMV just in general. It's such like a diverse, eclectic musical landscape. But I didn't know either, because I there's this famous freestyle with him and YG Tech called Forgiveness, where he says, "Alone really on my A word since that Herschel stuff." And he like actually calls him out by name. And after I watched the series, I like listened to the song again, and I was like, oh my God, he's like actually talking about these events like in real time. The music's fantastic. If you want to give it a chance, please do. But I was actually talking to my friend who's from Baltimore, shout out Keon, and he was telling me about like how him and his family like experienced a lot of the stuff that was represented in the show. And that kind of like really hit home for me, that like someone that I know personally was like, I don't know, it was so like damning of the BPD and every aspect of the show that's horrible. Like, to show and see that this is something that really happens to people, like that just made it like completely different from The Wire to me, because The Wire was like beautiful, it was Shakespearean, it was like a play, but this, like, it just keeps getting more horrible, and you like think to yourself like there's no way something like that really happened, and then you have to like snap back into it and be like, oh my God, this is like a real story, something that really happened in a major city in America in my lifetime. And especially the way that they like represent the protests and how the police engage with protesters. I think that this was retrospective rather than reactionary, and I think that bodes well for the show.
Yeah. I do want to say that there are some, to your point, Tanisha, some really amazing performances in this. They're the ones that we've already mentioned, but some of the just the performances in these interrogations are remarkable. I've particularly been drawn to the work of Daryl Britt Gibson, another holdover from a much smaller role in The Wire. He plays Jamel Rayam, one of the people. He also plays kind of a cop caught up in this very crooked and abusive gun task force that's ultimately is headed by the John Bernthal character. And his explanations in those interrogations of what's going on, how he got involved in it, just everything he does with his face and his voice and his timing. I went back and rewatched some of them this morning, and they really hold up very well. They're really riveting. But I guess I'm sort of wondering how well you think. I don't know. I'm kind of hoping I can sort of draw you out a little bit. I mean, I think you do have some issues with this work, and I'm wondering if you're comfortable talking about them.
Oh, 100%. Sam actually stepped right into the perfect segue because I am actually curious of his friend who grew up in the DMV, whether or not that friend is actually watching this show.
Oh, he is. We actually talked about it, and that's like how the conversation spurred up.
What made him want to pick it up? Was it the hype of the story? Was it because it was about where he's from?
Yeah, and well, actually, it was my suggestion because I knew he was from Baltimore. I was like, because nobody my age is going to watch his show, and my dad can't work HBO, and I have nobody else to talk to about it. So I was like, hey, Keon, do you want to watch this? And he was like, yeah, this is like really what happens, and I'm really happy that this story is getting out there and more people are learning about the details about it. We actually talked about it this morning.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense that you introduced it to him because I don't know any. I won't speak for anyone else but myself. I wouldn't have fallen into this show on my own, knowing the premise. And it doesn't surprise me in the way that it sounds like it didn't surprise your friend who you suggested this content to, that this was what was going on, because I live in perpetual fear of police contact. In fact, I think just watching this project had me in a bit of a trauma response because I am programmed to not want to have police contact. So, both listening to you and listening to Irene sort of go, it really makes me want to answer the question around justice, tells me a lot about where we are as a culture and the level of segregation within our culture as it relates to how we see this place that we live, but also the content that we're willing to watch and the benefit of the doubt we give that content about its purpose. Do I think it's good that you are understanding the context of American cities and how they are policed or not? Yes. Do I think you need this content to understand that? No, actually, I don't think you do. But I'm very curious about the remove that my white countrymen put themselves at when it comes to this kind of reality, and how the theatrical allows you to step into it and also step into it with some kind of surprise, which I think is deeply irritating to me. but is it working on you? I guess so. And should I be grateful for that? Maybe. But I want all of you to work a little harder than what this project, I think, offers.
I mean, I do want to say, I don't think any of us is surprised. I don't. If you're hearing surprise from us, I don't know. We all have followed the coverage. We are all, pretty conscious and aware of what's been going on in America, not just for the last 4 to 5 years, but really for essentially the entirety of American history. I'm not surprised by anything that I see here. The question to me, I guess back to you, would be, so would it be a better world if they didn't tell this story? It seems to me they are dramatizing and telling a story of, how did things get so bad? How did things go so unchecked? Even when there were, federal agents on the process from the Civil Rights Division, even when there was a real conscious effort to know about this and do something about it, how did cops? We know that police tend to be more accountable to one another than they are to the citizenry. They're always going to be that way. But this is a story about police who are accountable to no one else except themselves, and are disdainful not only of the community but of the people who are trying to supervise them. And I guess the question I have is, would it be a better world if this never got made? I think it's a better world that it did get made, but I sense from you, no.
I think I have more nuance to it, which is that it's not a yes or no question. It's a perspective question. I'm actually more interested in sitting in that diner of the clip we just played and understanding more of why these two Black people working for the feds are, one, working for the feds, two, boxed in a way in which they cannot make any progress, and three, why one of them is asking why you're angry. Are you angry? And I'll say four, I actually love that her line ends with, I don't let it I don't carry it with me, or something to that effect, because for me that line suggests that she's choosing joy over the trauma. But I'm more interested in that story being told, because I don't actually think the story of the police and why they do what they do or how they do what they do is something that needs to be told again. We've got lots of that. I'm actually interested in a different perspective. So it's a yes and for me.
Okay.
About.
Yeah.
And if I could just take like 1 second, I don't really think that this was like an educational experience for me. Like, I don't really think I look at art to like learn from. Like, I can like read books or there's other methods for me. But like me, my own, like personally, I've had my own experiences with the police. I got pulled over on my own college campus in my own car, being got accused of stealing my own car. People close to me, family members, close friends, like this isn't something I like had to take and learn from this to learn how the police operate. I can go outside and do that. Like that wasn't this for me. Like I think I'm just desensitized about all the stuff that I grew up with in the time I grew up in. And I totally understand your perspective on the situation. I totally understand why you would look at this show like this. But I don't know. I guess for me personally, I can look at this and feel comfortable looking these issues in the face and understanding that there's a difference between drama on television and what people experience in real life and the duality and nuance between the two.
I think you're a special person, Sam. I mean, part of the reason why I work in culture and I believe in it so much is because I think it does more work than the Academy, right? Because there are those of us who are committed to the Academy, who are committed to knowledge and to learning things from a book, but the vast majority of humanity learn things through story. 100%.
But that's kind of the argument for doing this, right? If we learn through story, if we learn through culture better than we learn through the Academy, then you want to do a 6-part HBO series on this problem.
I want to do a 6-part HBO series on the problem, but not through the point of view of the police.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, Tanisha, you really put your finger on something that I think is really important, and I'm agreeing, and I agree with you, and because I think in a way it's that there's too much of the stuff that we, yes, the cops are corrupt. Let's see another scene where they're corrupt. Okay, now let's see another scene where they're corrupt, And so in a way, what we want, or what I would want too, is more on the people looking for justice and the search for justice, which kind of is happening, but it's happening like a smaller percentage than I would want. Like maybe the cops get a much bigger role. The scenes with the cops and the scenes with the corruption get a bigger role than the scenes with what it means to find justice, because it seems like that's so much an issue for our time right now. Are people going to get in trouble for their corruption, or are they not? And if they're not, everything is going to fall apart. And so we need drama about that search, and it's here in it, but we want more of it. So that's why it'll be interesting. Okay, there's only 2 more episodes, and we'll see where they go. But anyway, so thanks for that, because I think it's, in a way, it's the balance of the things. That's exactly where I am, Irene. And I think that what happens in this balance is that it supports a kind of complicity of like, this is just how things are, right? And that is the danger of culture, because it just underlines and underscores what we think we know to be true. And it doesn't do the activation piece, which I think a different balance in this project could do.
But I guess my question would be like, do we want to be right, or do we want to be utilitarian? Because like, if we could, this show could be a lot of the things that we're talking about, but I think it has a positive impact for people who might not be as educated in this subject. Like I said earlier, it's a show, not tell. Like, it's not a lecture. Like, if I show this to someone who maybe isn't educated on how the police operate, there wouldn't be a way for them to negate what's going on. But I also understand that, like, we want to be right. We want to tell these stories right. But at some point, we want to be utilitarian and do the most good for the most amount of people as well. So, like, it's like a balance.
I'm not buying that we don't know that we all aren't aware of how the system works. In fact, I think we continue to tell ourselves we don't know, and we need stories like this to inform us. And I think that's BS. I think we do know, actually. And stories like this help to underscore a narrative that without these stories, we would not know. And that, to me, is very dangerous.
We're going to have to sort of segue into our next subject. Although I will just quickly say, I was rewatching a whole bunch of it this morning just to kind of rethink some of this stuff. It holds up very well. I saw new things, and I would agree. But by the way, I said this as we were emailing. I mean, I miss characters like Wallace and D'Angelo that we had in the early seasons of The Wire. And of course, by the time you get to season 4 of The Wire, those school kids, you are just, as wrapped up in their lives as you could almost possibly be. There isn't that kind of thing. There isn't really the sort of civilian, quote unquote, perspective on all of that. But I think there are things. There's a remarkable conversation between Nicole Steele and this black cop who's been sort of put out to pasture in this historical park or something in Baltimore that I had a hard time even believing existed. And he's just, he couldn't do the bad policing. They wouldn't let him do the good policing. And the stuff that he says, I think, is said very movingly, and a lot of those messages do get out. I agree that we're spending a lot of time talking about Josh Charles's character taking a big dump, and everybody's getting the wrong size crabs and bringing Mike's hard lemonade to the picnic instead of the beer, and there's an awful lot of that kind of stuff. Although I did love the scene where Josh Charles is sitting in a bar, and Nicole Steele, the character Nicole Steele, comes in to interview him, and he's been eating these wings and really kind of sucking on the bones of the wings, and then he shakes hands with her, and she just, without really commenting, takes the little wipette towel that he's got, just cleans her hands off before she's even willing to talk to him. There's little stuff like that you kind of love in the world of David Simon. All right, we have to take a little break. We'll come back. We will talk about the Northman.
Baltimore is a poster child for the basic failure to stop lawlessness.
No justice, no peace. I heard your calls for no justice, no peace.
All right, we are back. The Northman is the third major feature film by Robert Eggers, the first two being The Witch and The Lighthouse. Those were both very low-budget efforts. They allowed him to leverage a much bigger budget, rumored to be $90 million, or as they say, north of $90 million. This movie is north of everything, hence being called The Northman. It actually takes place in 3 different countries, somewhere in the 900s. It's based on an existing Icelandic or Viking legend, the tale of Amleth. He's played by Alexander Skarsgård. There's a terrific cast that includes Nicole Kidman, Claes Bang, who's a Swedish actor, Ethan Hawke, and Willem Dafoe are there for a cup of coffee or a cup of mead or whatever people are drinking in those scenes. Bjork plays a seeress, so basically no acting involved. And let's hear a little bit of this. You are going to hear Anya Taylor-Joy. You fell in love with her either in The Witch or more likely in Queen's Gambit. She is Olga of the Birch Forest. She has been captured as a slave by I don't want to spoil too much. She's a slave. Alexander Skarsgård is Amleth. He is sort of the Hamlet figure. This whole movie is basically Hamlet and Gladiator made into one movie. And Phil Martin as Hallgrimr, the half-troll. You'll hear basically them discussing the premise of the movie.
Why would he stow away to such a hellish place? This ground harbors evil.
My fate has brought me here to find what was stolen from me.
And what is that?
A mother, a father, a kingdom.
This is your kingdom?
The traitor who stole my kingdom fled here when another king took it from him. I will leave when I'm done with him.
I am Olga of the Birch Forest. And I too vow to escape this island.
Then you must face many foes.
As do you. Would you face them alone? Your strength breaks men's bones. I have the cunning to break their minds.
You two, hold that trap! Walk on!
That actually is some of the snappier dialogue in this movie. I mean, the dialogue is sort of an issue here, but I mean, really maybe the most quotable line in the movie is, your strength breaks men's bones. I have the cunning to break their minds. So, Irene, get us going on the Northman. How did this work for you?
All right. Well, when I first was watching it, I kind of had a reaction similar to Tanisha's to the other show, which was, why are they making this in 2022? But as I've been thinking about it, that perspective, I've sort of have some answers and some thoughts about that question. And it definitely is. The clip it, kind of gives you a feel for the vibe of the movie, and the whole idea, and so I know. Also, it really helped to read that article in the New Yorker that Colin sent us, to discover how meticulous the director was about all the details and everything. And it was kind of interesting how it was one of those stories, but he had hallucinogenics and pagan rites and all that as kind of just seamlessly integrated into the story itself, which I thought was kind of interesting in terms of the pagan religion, because they emphatically were not Christians. And so it was one of those movies about that kind of my fate has brought me here to find what was stolen from me. Is just that kind of, if that kind of mindset interests you, then it's definitely a movie for you.
Yeah, when you're saying that, I'm also thinking of the director Alfonso Cuarón, who is a big admirer of Eggers and talks in that New Yorker article about the fact that Eggers has kind of a gift for just getting weird stuff like hallucinogenic moments or just really weird, mystical, fairy-like vibes or prophecies. And they just don't seem like any particular departure from the fabric of what's going on. It's just like, okay, this thing's happening now, and it's exactly like all the other stuff that was happening, except that it's really weird and supernatural. And he does seem to have some gift for that. Before I get to the other two panelists, I also just want to say the thing that you do need to know about Eggers is he has a kind of mania for authenticity. So for The Witch, not only did they have to, build things that really looked very much like structures from the 17th century, they had to use the kind of saws that would have been available to people in the 17th century building these structures. Skarsgård talks about how there's a Viking ship that's like out of focus in the distance in the background of a shot that people will barely even notice, but it has all been built meticulously with as much attention, with all kinds of curators and historical consultants working on it, so that if you were ever to get up close to it, which you never will, it will be this very accurate depiction or rendering of an actual Viking ship from that period. Anyway, Tanisha, obviously just react or whatever.
Or whatever. So I want to start with what you just talked about, which is like that kind of level of specificity and authenticity that seems to drive Eggers. I actually haven't seen the other two projects that he's made, and I'm actually very curious to check them out. Having seen The Northman, content-wise, this is again not my cup of tea, but I do think that there is something really theatrical about what he's doing. I started to think about Peter Jackson, and wondering, like, is he sort of in that kind of lineage? I think the work is really stunning to look at. Just really, really immaculate. And it's interesting. I did not get a chance to read your New Yorker article, but it doesn't surprise me to hear that level of artistry is like embedded in how he thinks of things. And I think it comes through in the performances, as well. There's something really like specific but grand about all of the performances. I actually loved Nicole Kidman, and I wish there was more of her, actually. It sort of felt like this is the Nicole Kidman as an older actor, not just being used for her lithe sexuality and sensuality, but for something a little more grand. I think from an art piece perspective, it's really beautiful, and folks, it'll win all the art direction awards in the Oscars, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I agree about Kidman too. I think it's sort of a chance for her and Alexander Skarsgård to work out some of their differences from Big Little Lies, where he was her abusive husband. Well, here they're mother and son, but not really confined to that relationship. I don't want to say any more about that without spoiling, but there's some and I do agree. It has a kind of beauty, Tanisha. I found myself thinking, I want to be in James Hanley's beautiful Trinity Cine studio and possibly have just taken a gummy like 2 hours before screen time. And I'm thinking I'm really going to be on quite a journey if that's happening. Sitting in my house was not quite what I was looking for. Sam, we need to hear from you too.
So I kind of hate movies like this, like Viking, Medieval, Where Art Thou? I absolutely have had a lifelong disdain for these films. They're hard to follow. It's always the same plot. Like, I didn't love Game of Thrones. I didn't love that little movie that Brad Pitt did, Troy or whatever. I've never liked any of these movies. I was my friend Kevin, who like loves all these artsy A24 smoke cigarette before movies. He's been itching me to go watch The Northman, and I actually like really enjoyed it. I know that people are probably going to be mad about how simple the dialogue was, but it made it really easy to follow, which I liked. There was some really standout performances from like Nicole Kidman, who I don't think I've ever actually seen her in a super serious role. So that was really cool to see like her acting chops, except spoiler alert, that moment where she like Frenches her son.
Oh, no. That's too spoilery. Too spoilery.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad you screamed. But this was kind of just like a very bro-y movie. Like I think I emailed this. It was like Fast and Furious for people who read Kurt Vonnegut. Like this was like a bro dude movie. Like this was like, and it was like essentially Gladiator, like you said earlier. Like that, I'm not going to give it away, but like very similar plot points. I loved the action scenes. Thought they were really well done. Loved the authenticity. It was a very familiar story that we've seen get told millions and millions and millions of times. Probably the oldest story in time, but that's the thing about bro dude, movies is that like we're just kind of there to enjoy them, I guess. But yeah, I enjoyed myself.
So one of the reasons, by the way, that the dialogue is stilted, I mean, part of it is, I think, Sean, the Icelandic poet who was working from original material and writing this and then getting it translated into English may bring certain qualities to it. But this is the first Eggers movie that has been tested in front of audiences. He didn't have the final cut. He's not happy about that. And the audiences often didn't understand what was happening, which I don't quite get because it's a pretty simple plot, but they didn't understand what was happening. So they actually went back in and they looped new lines, but it was like, we've got 18 syllables and the fourth one has to begin with T because you can really see Skarsgård making that noise. Write a new line that'll scan there and we'll loop that in. And that may account for some of the badness of the dialogue. Although, Irene, Tanisha mentioned Peter Jackson. I find myself, and this is not an original idea for me, but I find myself thinking about Coppola at Apocalypse Now. We know in the New Yorker article that Ethan Hawke said he wanted to be on a set like Apocalypse Now and Coppola. Now he was. And I think of Werner Herzog, and in both of those cases, there were documentaries made about how hard it was to make the movie, and people got hurt and people died. And you get the feeling that this is, if you turn Eggers loose, that's who he's going to turn into. This maniac director who just puts everybody through hell and either gets something amazing or something ridiculous.
Well, absolutely. And that makes me just think about gender. I mean, Sam said it was like a bro movie, which I think is true. There was a lot of violence and fighting scenes that I didn't enjoy in the way that Sam did. And I was thinking, are there any women directors who work that way? I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to have every little detail perfect. There are quite a few male directors who do that, but it seems like there's something male. There's some maleness in that impulse to say everything has to be exactly the way I want it, and everyone has to suffer, but I don't care because I'm achieving my vision. And I think that's, and I, in a way I would ask, without giving any spoilers, does this offer anything beyond that perspective? I mean, I think it does, or it hints at something, but it and so I won't say more than that, but I think for anyone who watches it, it'd be interesting to think about that. Is that all there is? Is it completely another story like we've heard so many times, or does it offer anything for our 2022 sensibilities? Which I think it does, but I can't say because I don't want to give any spoiler. But
yeah, I agree, and I agree about not giving a spoiler. Although, I mean, Tanisha, this is a movie about revenge. Revenge is one of the oldest and most consistent plots, and it really does have a tremendous amount of kinship plot-wise with Hamlet. And it's hard to say anything new about revenge. And without doing any spoilers, I would say I think I know what Irene is saying, and I think she is suggesting that at least it is not a movie that valorizes or glorifies revenge.
I don't know if I would go that far.
Okay.
But what I'll say, the Papulian thread for me between these two projects is an underlining and an underscoring of who is dominant in our culture. I'm with you, Irene. I'm not sure that the Northman offers anything more than pretty pictures. And I'm very curious about your note about gender. And while I think of myself as a director who, if given the resources, would absolutely want to build the world site specific to what we were endeavoring towards, I don't think that everyone's going to suffer because this vision I have in my head must come to fruition is a way that I work. And I don't think it's the way that women work. And I think that this commitment towards violence as the way forward, the way to world build, is something I'm not particularly interested in. And I do think it's patriarchal. I do think it is gendered. And I hear you, Sam. I hear you say it's bro-y. Yeah, it is. It's very bro-y. I'm not sure that's what we need.
I agree. I hope everybody knows, like, I'm not a bro. Like, I might wear Air Force Ones and like wear like Nike gray sweatpants, but I am not a bro.
Air Force Ones are more black than they are bro-y. Just for the record.
But yeah, it wasn't a compliment. And you're like absolutely right. Like, Irene's point was beautiful. Like, how I feel like all throughout movie history, other people have had to suffer for men's accomplishments. Like, if you think about like any famous director, like everyone's like, oh, Hitchcock was so cool, and then you're like, oh wait, he's kind of a nut. And then you can do the same thing with essentially any other male director, and they're just given the grace because of how good the product was. And yeah, you're 1,000% right. I couldn't even imagine arguing against that. And like, is this needed today? No, not really. It didn't really offer anything different, but that's the whole crux. There's a reason why there's 9 Fast and Furious movies. The bro-y movies will never die because bros love them.
Although the one thing I would say is that the Fast and Furious movies, to the extent that I know enough about them to pronounce about them, they are kind of about bros. They're about brotherhood. They're about Vin Diesel's always going, we're a family here. We're a family, and this is not that. This is like a guy who doesn't have any friends. Nobody likes him, and he doesn't like anybody.
I can name you a million.
That's why I think it's dangerous.
Yeah, no, it might be. Yeah, he is a little bit. I agree. I don't mean to cut anybody off, but we're really kind of hitting the clock here. So we have to say goodbye to the Northman, but not goodbye to our wonderful panel. They're going to come back, make some recommendations. All right, we are back. We are back with our wonderful panel, but right now it's time for me to say some thank yous. One of them is to Kat Pastor, our technical producer, who keeps everything running all week long, every week, and also to Jonathan McPants. He is the producer of this and 99.9% of No's episodes. Now our panel will make some recommendations to you. Denisha, I always do really enjoy your recommendations. And not to set you up, but what have you got for me this week?
Nothing will ever beat the MVP of my endorsements, which is the yield sign. But
that was really good.
I will endorse Wedding Band by Alice Childress. My dear friend Owoye Tempo is directing it down at theater for a new audience. I saw it last week. It's starring Thomas Sadowski and Brittany Bradford. It's really beautiful. It reminds me of why theater needs to happen, right? Because sometimes there are experiences that cannot exist, as you alluded to, in your living room. And so I totally, if anybody wants to take a trip down to Brooklyn, endorsed Wedding Band. And I also haven't been down there in so long, and to see this sort of neighborhood of theater with BAM over there and the Shakespeare Center. That's one of my endorsements. And then my second is the Pulitzer Prize winning Kendrick Lamar. If you haven't talked about it yet, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers came out last Friday, I think. Auntie Diaries is the song I would endorse specifically. It is beautiful and amazing and wonderful to have hip hop talk about trans people, trans Black people. shout out to Kenny for continuing to push us forward. Love him.
All right, I got to go from there to Sam. I mainly just listen to stuff that Sam tells me to listen to. He might have been planning to tell me Kendrick Lamar. Anyway.
That was actually exactly what I was going to do. I was going to bully you right here into listening to this album. And I will say, because I can't endorse it as well, but it's like tender, it's uncomfortable, it's challenging, it's thought-provoking. Anybody with ears and a brain should be listening to that album. I will pivot to my two other recommendations, the things I'm going to be listening to this weekend. Harry's House from Harry Styles. I'm actually like a massive Harry Styles fan. I love his music. He reminds me a lot of Jagger and Bowie and kind of like that era of rock and roll. So if you're a guy who screams at his radio about how music isn't the same anymore, try out Harry Styles' album. It's pretty good. And then I will recommend I Never Liked You by Future. Future is about 40 years old, and he's probably been the most consistent music maker of the 21st century. And he's kind of returned to form. And he dropped the best hit record of the year, Wait For You, with Drake and Thames. So Future's album and Harry Styles' album. That's my recommendations.
All right, Irene Papoulis, what have you got for us?
Well, those were great. Okay, so I have two, and the first one is connected to the Northman, and it's a movie that was made in 1994 called The Prince of Jutland, also called Royal Deceit. For some reason, it has those two. But Kristen Bale plays Amleth, Helen Mirren is his mother, Gabriel Byrne is the uncle, Brian Cox is in it, Kate Beckinsale is in it, and it's kind of like a campy version of the North. It's totally different, but it's just really fun to see a very, very young Kristen Bale playing that part. If you're interested in
and say the name of it again.
It's called The Prince of Jutland, Jutland, but then for some reason it's also called Royal Deceit. So and it's on Prime for $3.99. And the other, and I've also been watching the Andy Warhol Diaries, which don't miss it. It's on I would say it's on Netflix. It's just a wonderful documentary about Andy Warhol. And it just sinks you into New York in the 70s and 80s, New York City, and him and the factory. And it takes you in there, and they interview all kinds of people from John Waters to, he had this boyfriend named Jed, and Jed isn't with us, but his twin brother is. And so they interview him, and it's just, you just learn, anything you would want to know and more about Andy Warhol. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I've been watching some of it too, and I would, based on what I've seen, second that emotion. All right, I'm going to do sort of part two of last week's recommendation. I was halfway through Emily St. John Mandel's new book, Sea of Tranquility. I've now finished it. It really is one of the best things I've read in a long time. It's a almost uncanny book. You feel as though the book, I don't know, you feel as though the book that's talking to you and talking about itself. It does involve sort of elements of time travel, elements of the simulation hypothesis, and she plays with that in an almost magical way. I really am just bowled over by this book. As much as I loved Station 11, this book is sort of right up there with it. I also want to endorse the second season of Hacks. We need something more cheerful to talk about than everything that I made us wallow through this week. Hacks is this terrific Gene Smart vehicle on HBO. It's about an aging comedian who is dealing with issues with her own staff, and she also brings in a new writer played by Hannah Einbinder, who is the daughter of Lorraine Newman. And the second season of something like this, it really can go wrong. But so far, they've really managed to keep that same combination of pathos and comedy going, and a kind of amusing meanness going. But there's just a completely remarkable scene where Gene Smart's character, Diana, winds up on this lesbian cruise where she's the entertainment. But one night in just the lounge, she kind of hijacks the piano, or the piano player anyway, and starts singing "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman," and all of the audience just joins in. And just even separate from everything that's going on in the series, this is a really, really magical moment. This being Hacks, it immediately turns sour, but for a moment, you're just having some really wonderful bliss. The kind of bliss that I experience when Tanisha Dugan and Irene Papoulis and Sam Hadelman join me on the nose, and I experience bliss knowing that you're listening too. So thanks for doing that.
Waterberry, Alderberry, Woodberry, hitting on New Britain, Vernon, I already said that one, Avon, Farmington, yeah.